The sun was a hammer on the Arizona dirt, beating down on the little cluster of homes they called Cedar Creek. It wasn't much a scatter of dusty wooden boxes. A general store with a tired porch, a corral with a few skinny horses. It was a place for people who had nowhere else to go, or who were trying to outrun something. Eleanor Caldwell was one of those people. Folks called her Nora. She moved through her days on the edge of the settlement like a ghost in a faded calico dress. Her hands did the work chopping wood, drawing water, tending the little garden that fought against the dust, but her eyes were empty. Just a few months back, fever had taken her husband. Then, a week later, it took her little girl, barely 6 months old. The silence in her small cabin was a heavy thing, thick and suffocating. It was worse than any sound. Up in the broken, rusty-colored rocks of the mountains that leaned over Cedar Creek, another group of people was trying to be silent. A band of Chiricahua Apache, maybe 30 souls in all, were hiding. The U.S. cavalry had been chasing them for weeks. They were tired, hungry, and their feet were sore on the sharp stones. Among them was a young man named Kalenya. His face was hard, carved by sun and struggle, but his hands were gentle as he helped his wife Sansi. She had just given birth, right there in the dust of their flight, to a boy. They named him Taza. Sansi was weak. The travel had been too much, and she had no strength left to make milk for the baby. Taza's cries were thin, like the whine of a mosquito, a sound of pure need that cut through Kalenya harder than any soldier's bullet. Down in Cedar Creek, the men gathered, their voices low and nervous. They had seen the signs of distant smoke, a strange track. They knew someone was up in those rocks. Fear spread through the settlement like a stain. They checked their rifles, nailed extra boards across their windows. They told their women and children to stay inside. Nora heard the talk from her porch, but it felt far away, like thunder on the other side of the hills. Her own grief was a closer, more present danger. The Apache were out of food. The roots and rabbits they found weren't enough, not for a newborn and a weakened mother. Something had to be done. So, under the cover of a moonless night, Kalenya and a few other men slipped down from the heights. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for sacks of flour, a side of bacon, anything to keep their people alive. They moved like shadows towards the settlement's small storehouse dot, but fear makes people jumpy. A dog barked. A man from Cedar Creek, standing watch with his heart in his throat, saw a shape move and fired his rifle into the dark. The shot was a crack that shattered the night. Suddenly, everyone was shouting. More shots rang out, wild and panicked. The Apache scattered, grabbing what little they could. In the terrible noise and confusion, as Kalenya ran back towards the rocks, a single stray bullet, fired by no one knew who, found its way. It tore through the darkness and struck Sansi, who was huddled with the other women and children away from the fighting dot. By the time Kalenya found her, it was over. She was gone. The world for him narrowed to a silent, screaming point. He knelt in the dirt, clutching her hand. Then the sound came, the weak, hungry cry of his son. The baby was squirming in the arms of an old aunt, who looked at Kalenya with despair. They had no milk, no mother. In this high, cold desert, a newborn without its mother's milk would be dead by morning. A madness took hold of Kalenya then. A grief so deep it turned into a wild, clear plan. He looked down at the scattered lights of Cedar Creek, the place of the people who had just taken everything from him. His thoughts were not of revenge, not in that moment. They were of his son's survival. One light was separate from the others, a small cabin a stone's throw from the main cluster. It looked lonely, quiet. He took Taza from his aunt. He wrapped the baby tightly in the last piece of soft deerskin they had. He did not speak. He just turned and started walking back down the mountain towards the enemy. He moved not as a warrior, but as a desperate animal, driven by a single instinct. He avoided the main streets, sticking to the shadows, his ears ringing with his son's frail cries. He reached the cabin with a lone light. It was quiet. From inside, he could hear no voice, only the faint crackle of a dying fire. This was the place. With a final look at his son's tiny face, he did the unthinkable. He placed the deerskin bundle gently on the rough wooden steps of the porch. He touched the baby's cheek once, a feather-light brush of his fingers. Then he melted back into the night, leaving his heart crying on a stranger's doorstep. Inside that cabin, Nora was sitting in her chair, staring at the ashes in the fireplace. The gunshots had echoed, but they meant nothing to her. The emptiness inside her was louder. Then a new sound crept in. Not a cry exactly, more of a mewling, a soft, struggling whimper. She thought she was dreaming it, another trick of her broken heart. But it persisted. Frowning, she stood and went to the door. She hesitated, then pulled it open. The cold night air rushed in. And there, on her step, was a bundle. For a wild second, her mind refused to understand. Then she saw the tiny, dark head, the little mouth working silently. An Apache baby, alone. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She snatched the bundle up and brought it inside, shutting the door on the world. She unwrapped the deerskin. The baby was beautiful, with a head of thick black hair, but his skin was cool, and his cries were getting weaker. He was starving. He turned his head, seeking something that wasn't there. Nora's own body answered with a physical, painful ache. Her breasts, which had only recently dried after her daughter's death, tightened with a familiar, heavy pang. Milk. She had milk. This baby needed it. This enemy's child. Her hands shook. Everything she knew, every rule of her world, screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, unthinkable. But kneeling on her floor, holding a dying child, all she could hear was a different, older rule. A mother's rule. This child needed to eat, and she could feed him. With trembling fingers, she unbuttoned the top of her dress. She brought the baby close. Little Taza, sensing what he needed, latched on with the last of his strength. And in the quiet of the lonely cabin, a white woman who had lost everything began to nurse an Apache warrior's son, her tears falling softly into his dark hair. She had no idea that on a dark ridge above, the child's father was watching her window, holding his breath, waiting to see if the faint light within would go out. The first light of dawn was creeping through the cabin's single window when Nora finally moved. The baby she could not bring herself to think of him as Taza yet. That would make him a person with a name and a past, was asleep against her chest, his belly full for the first time in days. Her body felt a strange, hollow relief, but her mind was a storm. She knew what would happen when the settlement woke up. They had heard the gunshots, the shouting. They would be angry and afraid, and she had the source of their fear sleeping in her arms. She heard the voices first, men gathering in the dusty street. Their words were sharp and worried. She peeked through a crack in the wooden shutter. The minister was there, his hat in his hands. The blacksmith, a big man with forearms like tree trunks, held his rifle. A few other men stood with them, their faces hard. Nora's heart thudded against the baby's back. She stepped back from the window, holding him tighter. A soft knock came at her door. It was not a friendly sound. "Miss Eleanor?" "It's the minister. We need to speak with you." We have a situation." She didn't answer. She just stood in the middle of her small room, frozen. The knock came again, louder. "We know you're in there. We saw. Something was left on your porch." Slowly, with her free hand, she slid the heavy wooden bar across the door, locking it. The sound was final. "Leave me be," she called out, her voice tighter than she wanted. "Miss Eleanor, you cannot keep that child in there." This was the blacksmith's voice, booming. "It's a danger. Its people are up in those rocks. They'll come for it, and they'll kill everyone here to get it back." "It's just a baby," she said, her voice breaking. "It's a snake," another man spat. "You raise it, it'll bite you. Bring it out. We'll deal with it." Nora's blood went cold. Deal with it. She knew what that meant. Her arms curled around the sleeping infant. A fierce, hot feeling rose in her chest, one she hadn't felt since she buried her own daughter. It was the need to protect. The minister tried a softer way. "Eleanor, please, think. The child has no mother. What will you feed it? It'll be dead by sundown anyway. Don't make this harder. Hand it over, and we'll see it's taken care of." That's when the baby stirred. He made a small, fussing sound, rooting against her dress. He was hungry again. The men outside heard it. Their talking stopped. "She's still got it in there," someone whispered, loud enough to hear Nora look down. The baby's dark eyes were open, looking up at her without any fear, only need. He was so small, so alive. The minister's wife had said to try gruel-thin broth. But Nora knew. She had held a failing baby before. She knew the weak suck, the tired cry, the slow fading. Broth wouldn't save him. Only one thing would. She made her choice. She turned her back to the door, to the men and their fear and their hard solutions. She sat in her old rocking chair, the one she had nursed her own child in. With shaking fingers, she undid the buttons of her dress again. Outside, the men argued. Break the door down. One said, and do what? The minister replied, sounding troubled. Tear a baby from a woman's arms? We are not savages. Those Apaches are. They killed my cousin over in Silver Creek. We don't know that was this band, the minister said, but his voice was weak. Inside, there was only the soft sound of the baby nursing and the creak of the rocking chair. Nora cried silently. She cried for her own lost child. She cried for this baby's lost mother. She cried because the world was so cruel that this simple, natural act felt like a crime. She was crossing a line, one that could never be uncrossed. By feeding him, he became hers in a way, and she became his. It was a bond written in milk and survival, deeper than any law of man dot up on the ridge. Kalenya hadn't slept. He had watched the cabin all night, his eyes burning. He saw the men gather. He heard the raised voices, saw the gestures towards the door. His hand was clenched so tight around his knife that his knuckles were white. If they hurt his son, he would burn that whole settlement to the ground. He would kill every last one of them, but the door didn't break open. The men didn't storm in. They talked, and they argued, and finally, their shoulders slumping, they began to drift away. The blacksmith spat on the ground in frustration, but he left with the others. The cabin remained quiet and still in the morning sun. Kalenya let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then, a young boy from his band, who had been scouting closer, came crawling back to him. The boy's eyes were wide with confusion. What did you see? Kalenya asked, his voice rough. The boy struggled for words. The white woman, she feeds him. He made a vague gesture at his own chest. Kalenya stared. He understood. The white woman, the enemy, was nursing his son. His child was alive because of her milk. The news hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't what he expected. He had prepared for a fight, for a theft, for a tragedy. He had not prepared for this impossible kindness. It left him empty of anger, filled instead with a terrible, confusing shame and a flicker of a hope he didn't want to feel. Down below, The cabin door finally opened a crack, just after noon. Nora stepped out, the baby wrapped in a clean, old sheet of hers. She needed water. She walked to the well, aware that every curtain in Cedar Creek was twitching, that eyes were on her from behind every window. She worked the pump handle, filled her bucket, her back straight. She would not hide. She had done nothing wrong. She was keeping a child alive. As she turned to go back inside, she looked up towards the mountains. She didn't know why. A feeling, maybe. And there, on a high rocky outcrop, she saw a figure. Just a dark shape against the bright sky. It was too far to see his face, but she knew. It was the father. He was watching. He knew. For a long moment, they looked at each other across the great, empty distance. No words, no gestures. Just a white woman holding a baby at a well, and a grieving father standing on a stone cliff. Then Nora turned, picked up her bucket, and went back inside. She barred the door. But this time, she didn't feel like she was locking the world out. She felt like she was locking the two of them in her and this little boy who needed her. A strange, quiet peace settled over the cabin. The war outside, the fear of the settlement, the rage of the Apaches. For now, it was all just noise. In this small room, there was only the sound of a baby's contented sigh and a woman's heart beginning, slowly and painfully, to beat again. The silence that settled over Nora's cabin was thin, like a sheet of ice on a pond. It could crack at any moment. She moved through her days in a bubble. The baby she had started calling him Little Bird in her mind, for his soft, chirping cries, the center of her whole world. His needs were simple, and meeting them gave her a purpose that warmed the cold corners of her heart. But outside her door, the settlement of Cedar Creek was a pot about to boil over. The men were angry. The Apache band was still up in the mountains. They'd seen smoke from their fires. The feeling was that they were being watched, studied for weakness. The blacksmith, a man named Bill, with a temper as hot as his forge, became the loudest voice. "She's feeding that thing," he'd say to anyone who would listen outside the general store. "That makes her one of them. For all we know, she's signaling them, telling them when to attack." The minister, a kind but tired man, tried to calm things. "She is showing Christian charity, Bill. It is an infant. What would you have her do?" "I'd have her act sensible." Bill would shout. "That infant is a lure. Its daddy is up there, and he's going to come down here with knives to get it back. And when he does, people will die." Starting with her, Nora heard the talk. She heard the heavy footsteps that would pause outside her cabin, the muttered curses. She kept her door barred, and her old shotgun cleaned and loaded, leaning by the fireplace. It wasn't the Apaches she feared anymore up on the ridge. Kolenya was trapped in his own kind of prison. His people were desperate. The cavalry patrols were getting closer. They needed to move to find a safer place. But he could not leave his son. The young scout brought him pieces of news every day. Asterisk, the white woman carries him outside for sun. She sings to him. He cries less. Asterisk, each report was a stone dropped into the still water of Kolenya's grief. His son lived, thrived even, because of the enemy woman. The thought twisted inside him. His pride screamed that he should take his son back by force. But his heart, the part that was still a father and not just a warrior, knew the truth. If he stole the boy now, with no mother to feed him, he would be condemning him to a slow death. The woman's milk was his life. One evening, as the sun bled red over the rocks, Kolenya made a decision. It was a decision that broke every rule of his life. He told his brother what he would do. "You are walking into a trap," his brother said, his face dark. "They will shoot you on sight." "Then they will shoot me," Kolenya said, his voice flat. But I must see my son. I must speak to the woman. He took no rifle. He carried only his knife, tucked away, and a small, finely carved wooden horse, a toy he had been making for Taza before everything went wrong. He left the camp alone, moving like a shadow down the familiar path dot in the cabin. Nora was bathing Little Bird by the hearth, the warm water glistening on his healthy skin. He was filling out, his cheeks getting round. He kicked his little legs and made a happy sound. For the first time in months, a real smile touched Nora's lips. It was in that moment of softness that she heard it, not a bang or a shout, but a single firm knock on her door dot. Her blood froze. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of the men from town. This was different, deliberate. She grabbed the baby, wrapped him quickly in a blanket, and clutched him to her chest. She looked at the shotgun. Her hands were shaking. The knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. She stood in the middle of the room, unable to move. Who was it? What did they want? Then a man's voice came from the other side of the door. It was low, spoken with a heavy accent, and the words were strange, from no language she knew. But the tone was clear. It was not a threat. It was a request. Slowly, her heart hammering against the baby's back, she approached the door. She did not unbar it. She put her mouth close to the crack in the wood. Who's there? She whispered Dot. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, quieter now. The father. 2 words. They sucked the air from the room. Nora's knees felt weak. He was here, the Apache warrior, right outside her door. Images flashed in her mind, stories of raids, of scalps taken, of terrible violence. She held the baby tighter, but then she looked down. Little Bird was awake, calm, listening to the voice he had heard from his first moments of life. He did not cry. He simply looked toward the door. Nora took a deep, ragged breath. She thought of the man on the ridge, watching. She thought of his loss. She was a mother who had lost a child. He was a father who had lost everything else. A crazy, dangerous courage rose in her. With one hand still clutching the baby, she used the other to slide the heavy wooden bar back. It made a scraping sound. She opened the door just a few inches, peering out into the deepening twilight. He was there. Tall, with long black hair tied back, his face all sharp angles and shadows. He wore simple clothes, dusty from travel. He stood a full 10 feet back from the door, his hands held out from his sides, empty. He was showing her he had no weapon ready. His eyes went straight past her, to the bundle in her arms. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. His eyes were dark, full of a pain so deep it was like looking into a canyon. She saw no hatred there, only a terrible, weary hunger, the hunger to see his child. Nora's fear began to melt, replaced by a powerful, aching understanding. This wasn't a warrior. This was just a man. A broken man. Slowly, she opened the door wider. She did not step out, and he did not step forward. They kept the space between them, a safe and respectful distance. She shifted the blanket so he could see the baby's face. Little Bird blinked in the cool evening air. A shudder went through Kolenya. He saw his wife's nose, his own mother's brow, on this tiny, healthy face. His throat worked, but no sound came out. He took one small, involuntary step forward, then stopped himself. Remembering where he was, he looked from his son to the woman. He saw the tired lines around her eyes, the protective way she held the child, the defiance mixed with fear in her own gaze. He saw a mother. Just as his Sansi had been, he didn't know her words. He pointed a finger gently at his own chest, then at the baby. Taza, he said, his voice rough. He gave his son's name back to the world. Then he pointed to her and made a rocking motion with his arms, like one would cradle a baby. A question was in his eyes. Nora understood. He was asking if she would care for him, if she would keep him safe. She nodded. Just once. A firm, clear promise. Kolenya's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted and a new one put on at the same time. The fight went out of him. He reached slowly into a small pouch at his side. He pulled out the little wooden horse. He held it up, then placed it carefully on the ground, halfway between them. An offering. A thank you. He looked at his son one more time, his eyes drinking in the sight. Then he looked at Nora. He placed a hand over his own heart, then pointed to her. It was a gesture that needed no translation. My heart is with you. He turned then, and without another sound, he faded into the gathering darkness, becoming a part of the night from which he came. Nora stood in her doorway for a long time, the baby quiet against her. Finally, she stepped out, picked up the little wooden horse. It was smooth, beautifully made. She took it inside, closed the door, and placed it on the mantel next to a small porcelain doll that had been her daughter's. The two toys sat side by side. A private, silent truce had been made on her porch that night. It had nothing to do with armies or settlements. It was a treaty between two hearts. She knew the danger wasn't over. The settlement was still angry. The cavalry was still coming. But for tonight, the war was outside. In here, there was only peace, the soft breath of a sleeping baby, and the understanding that she was no longer alone in keeping him alive. The little wooden horse on the mantel changed everything. For Nora, it was a solid thing, a proof that the man in the darkness had been real. It wasn't just a dream born from fear and loneliness. He had trusted her enough to come close and to give a piece of himself to his son. That trust became a small, warm coal in her chest. For Kolenya, the meeting was a deep cut, but a clean one. The wound of his wife's death would never close, but the frantic, screaming worry for his son had quieted. He had seen the woman's eyes. He had seen her nod. His boy was safe. This let him think like a leader again, not just a father wild with grief. He moved his people further back into a hidden canyon, a place easier to defend. But every few days, as the moon waxed and waned, he would find himself drawn back to the ridge overlooking the lone cabin. A strange, silent routine began. It started because Nora, one morning, found a dead rabbit on her porch. It was a clean kill, left with care. She understood. It was not a threat. It was payment. Food for the milk. She took it inside, skinned it, and made a stew that lasted for days. The next week, she left something in return. She had noticed, from her doorway, the small, dry creek bed that ran near the base of the trail to the mountains. One afternoon, she took a tin cup and her bucket. She filled the bucket with clean water from her well and walked it to a flat, sunny rock in the dry creek. She poured the water into a natural hollow in the stone, making a small, clear pool. Then she placed the tin cup neatly beside it. She walked back home without looking up at the ridges. The next morning, the pool was empty, the cup was gone, and a bundle of soft, tanned deerskin was left on her porch. Perfect for making the baby a warmer wrap. He was giving her meat and hides. She was giving him water and a way to drink it without coming to the well where he might be seen. They never saw each other during these exchanges. It was a conversation without words, a slow back and forth of survival and thanks. Nora began to leave the cabin door unlocked during the day. Not open, but unlocked. It was a sign, though she couldn't have said exactly what it meant. Maybe it meant she wasn't afraid of him anymore, but the rest of Cedar Creek was more afraid than ever. The tension was a wire pulled tight. The men had formed a watch, taking turns walking the perimeter of the settlement with their rifles. They saw the Apache smoke in the new location. They saw Nora's trips to the creek bed, though they didn't understand them. "That woman is trading with them," Bill the blacksmith declared, his face red. "Mark my words. She takes them food from our stores. She's a spy in our midst." The minister argued for patience, but his words were lost in the wind of fear. People started avoiding Nora completely. When she went to the general store for flour and salt, the storekeeper's wife served her in cold silence, her eyes on the baby in Nora's sling, taking the money as if it were dirty. Then, one day, the cavalry came. They arrived in a cloud of dust. 10 men in blue uniforms, led by a captain with a stern face and a neat mustache. They were tired and looked like they had been riding a long time. The sight of them brought the whole settlement running, a mix of relief and nervous excitement. The captain stood on the general store's porch as the people gathered. "We're tracking a band of Chiricahua," he said, his voice clipped. "Signs lead to these mountains. They're dangerous. We believe they're responsible for raids near the border." Bill pushed forward. "They're right up there, Captain. And we got a woman here," he jerked his thumb toward Nora's cabin, "who's been harboring one of their young. Got it living right in her house." The captain's eyes, cool and calculating, followed the gesture to the small cabin at the edge of town. "Is this true?" he asked the minister. The minister wrung his hands. "Well, sir, she has an infant. An Apache infant. She cares for it. Out of mercy, you see. Mercy is a luxury out here," the captain said flatly. He strode toward Nora's cabin, his boots loud on the hard ground, his men and half the settlement following like a grim parade. Nora saw them coming. Her heart jumped into her throat. She had just fed Little Bird, and he was sleeping in a basket by the fire. Quickly, she smoothed her dress and opened the door before the captain could knock, stepping outside and closing it softly behind her. She would not let them storm into her home. "Ma'am," the captain said, touching the brim of his hat, "I'm Captain Riggs. I'm told you have a hostage Apache child in your possession." "It's not a hostage," Nora said, her voice quieter than she wanted. "It's a baby. His mother is dead. Where is its father?" Nora looked past him, at the hostile faces of her neighbors. She looked at Bill, who glared back. "I don't know," she said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Captain Riggs studied her face. He was a man used to seeing fear and to seeing lies. He saw the fear, but he didn't see the lie. He saw something else, a stubborn, protective strength. "Ma'am, that child is the key to finding that band. Its father will come for it. We can use it to draw them out. To end this, you need to hand the child over to me." A cold dread washed over Nora. Hand him over? For what? "For the safety of this settlement," the captain said, as if it were obvious. "We'll keep it safe. But when the Apaches come for it, we'll be waiting." Nora understood his plan perfectly. He wanted to use Little Bird as bait in a trap. The baby would be a crying lure in a box, and when Kalenia came, they would shoot him down. They might not mean to hurt the baby, but in a shootout, what chance would he have? She looked from the captain's stern face to the eager, angry faces of the men behind him. These were the people she was supposed to belong to. These were the faces of the ones who wanted deal with the problem weeks ago. Her back straightened. The warm coal of trust in her chest glowed hotter. She thought of the wooden horse, the deerskin, the hand over the heart in the twilight. She thought of a father's eyes, full of pain but no hate. "No," she said. The word was clear and solid, like a stone dropped in the dust. Captain Riggs blinked, surprised. "Ma'am, this is not a request. This is a matter of military necessity." "You have no necessity inside my home," Nora said, finding a strength she didn't know she had. "That child is in my care. He has done no wrong. He is not a weapon for you to use. You will not use him to draw his father into an ambush. I will not allow it. A murmur went through the crowd. Bill spat. Told you. She's with them. Captain Riggs' face hardened. You are obstructing the lawful pursuit of hostiles. I could have you arrested. Arrest me then, Nora shot back, her eyes blazing. But you will not have the child. You will have to explain to your superiors why you arrested a grieving widow for protecting a motherless baby while the actual hostiles are up in those mountains. She stared him down. This small woman in a faded dress against a captain of the cavalry. For a long moment they stood locked in a silent battle. He saw that she would not break. He saw the crowd divided. He needed the settlement's cooperation, and arresting this woman might turn them against him. Finally, he took a step back. This isn't over, ma'am. We will be camping here until we locate the band. I will be watching this house. If that child's father shows his face, we will take him. And if I see any sign you are aiding the enemy, you will face consequences. He turned on his heel and marched back toward the store, his men following. The crowd slowly dispersed, shooting dark looks at Nora. She stood on her porch until they were all gone, her hands clenched at her sides to stop their shaking. She had won this moment. But she had made an enemy of the cavalry and confirmed the worst suspicions of her neighbors. She went inside, barred the door, and lifted the sleeping baby from his basket. She held him close, rocking gently. I'm sorry, little bird, she whispered into his soft hair. The world is so hard. But I promised. I promised your father, and I promised you. I won't let them use you. On his ridge, hidden by juniper trees, Kalenya had seen it all. He had seen the blue coats arrive, seen the crowd gather at the woman's door. He saw her stand alone against them. He saw her defiance. He didn't know their words, but he understood the language of power, of threats, of a lone person standing their ground. He watched as the soldiers set up their camp at the other end of the settlement. The trap was now clear to him. They were waiting for him. He looked at the quiet cabin. The woman had protected his son again, not just with her milk, but with her courage. The debt he owed her was a mountain, too big to ever repay. He knew what he had to do now. It was the hardest thing. He had to leave. He had to lead his people and the cavalry away from this place, away from his son, and away from the brave white woman who had become his son's only shield. The pain of it was a physical ache, but it was the right choice. It was the only choice left. The 2 days after the captain's visit were the quietest yet. A terrible, waiting quiet. Nora could see the cavalry camp from her window, the blue figures moving like ants. They were watching her. She felt their eyes on her cabin every time she stepped out for water. She stopped going to the creek bed. The silent conversation with the mountains had to end for now. She stayed inside, the baby her only company, the walls feeling both like a sanctuary. In a cage dug up in the hidden canyon, Kalenya prepared his people to move. It was a sad, swift business. They had little to pack. He told them the plan. They would slip out under the next night's darkness, not east toward the deeper desert, but west, making a wide circle that would leave clear signs for the cavalry to find. They would lead the blue coats on a long chase, away from this place. His brother argued, "The boy is your son, your only son. We should try to take him." Kalenya shook his head, his face set like stone. To take him is to kill him, or to get him killed in the fighting. He is safe where he is. The woman, she is his mother now. She has proven this. It was the hardest truth he had ever spoken. But he had seen her stand against her own people, against the soldiers. He knew it in his bones. On the last evening, as the sun began to dip, he went to the ridge alone one final time. He looked down at the cabin for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He turned and walked down the mountain, not to the dry creek bed, but straight toward her home. Nora was stirring a pot of beans when she heard the soft sound outside. Not a knock, more like the brush of a moccasin on hard dirt. Her breath caught. She knew it was him. She glanced out the shutter. The cavalry camp was busy with the evening meal. No one was looking her way. She went to the door, her hand on the bar. She paused, then lifted it. He was there, closer than last time. The fading light caught the lines of sorrow on his face. He looked older. He held nothing in his hands. No gift, no weapon. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he pointed to the north, away from the settlement and the canyon, making a walking motion with 2 fingers. Then he pointed sharply to the soldiers' camp and made a sweeping gesture, as if leading them away. He was telling her his plan. He then pointed straight down at the ground beneath her cabin and held his hands out, palms down, in a still, firm gesture. Stay here. Be still. Be safe. Nora understood. He was leaving. He was going to draw the cavalry away from her and away from his son. This was goodbye. A lump rose in her throat, so big she thought she might choke. She turned quickly and went inside. He did not follow. Respecting the threshold. She came back out a moment later, the baby in her arms. Little Bird was awake, his dark eyes wide. She stepped fully onto the porch and held him out, not giving him away, but offering the father a clear, close look. Kalenya's stern composure broke. His eyes glistened. He took 1 step forward, then another, until he was right there. He didn't touch the baby. He just looked, his gaze poring over his son's face, as if trying to memorize it. He saw the health in his cheeks, the peace in his sleep. He saw the clean clothes Nora had made from the deerskin. He saw that his son was loved. He looked at Nora then, and she saw the storm of gratitude and grief in his eyes. He slowly reached up, and from around his neck, he untied a thin leather cord. On it hung a small piece of silver, hammered into the shape of a butterfly. It was simple, but beautiful. It had been his wife's. He held it out to Nora. She hesitated, then nodded. He didn't put it around her neck. Instead, he carefully looped the cord around the baby's tiny wrist, where it lay like a bracelet too big for him. It was a gift for the boy, but given through her. Then Kalenya did the last thing she expected. He placed his hand lightly on top of the baby's head. He closed his eyes and spoke a few soft, flowing words in his own language. A blessing. A prayer. When he opened his eyes, he looked straight at Nora. He touched his own chest. Kalenya. He was giving her his name. Then he pointed to her and to the baby held between them. He spoke 1 word, clear and thick with emotion. Shema. He turned and was gone, disappearing into the twilight so completely it was as if he had never been there. Nora stood on the porch, holding the baby, feeling the warmth of the man's hand still lingering on her child's head. She didn't know what the word meant, but the feeling behind it was unmistakable. It was a title, a name for her. The next morning, the cavalry camp was in an uproar. Scouts had found fresh trails leading west, clear as day. Captain Riggs barked orders. They broke camp in minutes, riding out hard, leaving Cedar Creek behind in a cloud of dust. The Apache band had been found, and the chase was on. The settlement let out a collective sigh. The immediate danger was gone, but the hard feelings toward Nora were not. She was now a stranger among them, a woman marked by her choice. It didn't matter. She had her baby. She had the little wooden horse and the silver butterfly bracelet, which she kept safe in a wooden box. Life, in its stubborn way, went on. Seasons turned. The baby Taza grew. He took his first steps on her cabin floor, said his first word. It was Ma. And he said it while reaching for her. She never saw Kalenia again, though sometimes, when the wind was right, she would find a small thing left on her porch, a perfect feather, a pretty stone. She knew he was out there, watching from a distance, keeping his promise. Years later, when Taza was a boy of 7, a stranger rode into Cedar Creek. He was an Apache, but he wore a mix of clothes and sat tall on his horse. He went straight to Nora's cabin, now with a bigger porch and a small garden. Nora, her hair touched with gray now, watched him come. She felt no fear. The boy, tall for his age, stood beside her. The man dismounted. It was Kalenia. Older, harder, but with a calm in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked at the boy, seeing the man he would become. He looked at Nora, seeing the years of care on her face. Taza looked at the stranger, curious, not afraid. He had heard the stories. Nora put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This is your father," she said softly. Kalenia did not try to take his son. He had come to visit. He spoke in halting English, learned in a world that was changing. He sat at her table and drank coffee. He told her, in his quiet way, that his people had finally found a place to live in peace, far to the south. He came back the next year, and the year after that. Sometimes he brought his new wife, a kind-eyed woman who smiled at the boy. Taza grew up with 2 worlds. He learned to read and write from Nora. He learned the stories of his own people from his father. He called Nora mother, and he called Kalenia father, and there was no conflict in it. Only a strange, rich truth. When Nora was an old woman, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, her grandchildren playing in the dirt, Taza's children, a government man came through. He was taking a census, writing down who lived where. He came to our cabin, seeing the old white woman and the Apache children. "And who are these to you?" he asked, pointing with his pencil. Nora smiled, looking at their laughing faces. She touched the silver butterfly, now worn smooth, that she wore around her own neck. "These are my grandchildren," she said. The man looked confused, looking from their dark hair to her pale, wrinkled face. "But their mother? Their father?" "Their father is my son," she said simply, and her tone invited no more questions. The man shrugged and wrote it down. He didn't understand, and he didn't need to. The truth lived in the cabin, in the laughter, in the 2 small toys that still sat on the mantel. The woman who had nursed an enemy's baby had built a family. She had become a story told by the Apache around winter fires, the tale of the brave Shima, the mother who came from the other world. And in Cedar Creek, though some never forgot their old fear, she was simply known as Nora Caldwell, the woman who had a heart big enough to change the world, one small, hungry child at a time.